Hello everybody, I'm Oliver and this is Chaotic Bibliophile. Before you congratulate me because, oh my god, he's made such progress with his tags, this is a different wall. It's not that I've accumulated these books since I last recorded. I'm just recording on another space. This has been here for a while. I will say these are notebooks that I bought. These are all work adjacent books, so let's leave it at that, shall we? Today, I bring you my Nonfiction November wrap-up because I said I was gonna do it and I had a lovely Nonfiction November. I want to tell you about it, but before the podcast is up, the first episode is up, the second episode is recorded, and I just need to edit it. I'm really excited. It's just been really fun. I am telling you about it because I uploaded it using the podcast option on YouTube, which I did not know was a thing until I tried it. So I don't know how it shows up for you. Check it out if you're interested. It's just a rambly thing that you can listen to and hopefully it'll sound cozy to you. It'll be fun. You can, do your chores, have a little knit, have a little meal to it, a walk. Nonfiction November, how was it for you? Let me know in the comments. I really loved it. I said I was gonna go all out and I did go all out. I read mostly nonfiction, I would say 90%. The only exceptions were either ongoing reading projects or the audiobook for Butter finally came through in the library. Why am I here telling you about the fiction that I read? So, mostly nonfiction, as I said, and it was great. I also did the photo challenges for like 10 days and then my life went crazy again and I just couldn't swing it, and I've been traveling every weekend for different reasons, so it was just not going to happen. And so I uploaded a picture which I said was going to be my last picture for the event, and yeah, it was fun though to try and to participate and see other people uploading pictures, and it was just really fun. So if you want to check that out, I will link my Instagram down below. I mean, I always do it, but I put it now in the media mention bit. Okay, I have different categories. Let's just get into it because there's not that much, but there's lots I wanna sink my teeth into. First, we'll do a weird case where I accidentally read something that was fiction, or more like fictionalized nonfiction, and that is They Shot the Piano Player, a graphic novel by Fernando Trueba and Javier Mariscal. And this was originally translated from Spanish. Unfortunately, a specific translator is not credited. It says translated by Media Sur, which I'll assume is either the publisher or maybe a translation agency. This is a stunning graphic novel, and it's all about Tenorio Jr., who was a cutting-edge pianist who brought bossa nova to, I don't remember if it's New York specifically, but like the States and Europe, and then kicked off that symbiotic relationship between bossa nova and jazz. He was disappeared by the Argentinian dictatorship, and yeah, he just has been sort of forgotten by the general public and music history at large, but he is very well remembered by the biggest names in bossa nova and samba and sort of Brazilian music, even to this day. And so this follows a fictional journalist who writes this book as he interviews all the main characters that are still alive. And this inquiry takes him everywhere. And so it's just so interesting and so illuminating, and yeah, I found the art completely beautiful. Apparently there's a film that has the same style and I can't wait because I'm sure the music is lovely as well. But this journey that the fictional main character takes mirrors the director of the films, I think. So it's not complete fiction, if that makes sense, or again, it's a fictionalized account of a journey, and I did pick it up thinking it was graphic nonfiction, but I wanted to mention it first because it's excellent, and second because I just think it's interesting. In the English-speaking world, the distinction between fiction and nonfiction is more significant sometimes, or like a lot of, I don't know, there's more reflections about things that are autofiction or more concerns about genre and genre divisions, whereas I feel like in other languages that is not necessarily the case. If you even see the International Booker, there are often things that have been nominated that in other places would be considered non-fiction or memoir. Or on the opposite, I always say, for example, the Copenhagen trilogy by Tove Ditlevsen is considered fiction, and here it's sold as memoir, and it's just really interesting. So regardless, still great. If you're looking for a good graphic novel, beautiful, interesting. If you love music writing, can't go wrong with this one. Okay, now very quickly, 2 DNFs, The Beauty of Games by Frank Lanz, and this was supposed to be an introduction to games aesthetics, and not just video games, but games in general. So there's quite a bit about Go and poker, but also of course video games. And the poker bit I did like, this Go bit, like that chapter was the most illuminating, but also it has so much personal stuff that isn't really relevant. I love scholarship that is very personal. Obviously, Ace is one of my favorite books of all time and a book that I think everyone should read. So it's not really that, it's just the way it was done here. I felt like there was so much filler. I just didn't want to keep reading it, so I didn't. And likewise, Hidden Nature, A Voyage of Discovery by Alyx Fowler. This is a memoir where famous nature writer Alyx Fowler starts going on Birmingham Canal excursions. She gets really into it, and then she also discovers she's a lesbian, or at least bisexual, but wanting to explore her queerness. It just was fine. I've said so many times that my standard for memoirs is so high now. I don't want a memoir that is just, oh, this is an interesting story. I want memoirs that are interesting as literature, that are about the experience but also branch out, especially if it's a contemplative, inward-looking story. And there was some of it. Those were the best bits where she sort of branched out. But even then, as nature writing, I didn't feel it was especially evocative. The sexuality bit was also quite unexamined, in my opinion. It reads like she's uncomfortable going into too much detail because of the people involved, which is fair, except then maybe don't write a memoir about it. So now moving on to books that I started and haven't finished yet, but I am deeply enjoying. The first is Modern Nature by Derek Jarman. This is his account of moving to Prospect Cottage and starting his garden there. I've been making my way through this very slowly. I think initially I wanted to do like one a day, and I would still like to do that, and I haven't. But then some of them are so short that I'm like, okay, one a day, but I want to read a couple more. I think I should do at least one a day. One a day with an asterisk is what I'll do throughout December, maybe January then. One that I will definitely finish in December is My Great Arab Melancholy by Lamia Ziadé, translated by Emma Ramadan. This is just beautiful and so interesting. It takes the form of sort of a travel brochure, or it pretends that you, the reader, are going on a journey and are being guided. So if you've read The Reluctant Fundamentalist, which is obviously fiction, but it has that sort of same form. And then Jamaica Kincaid also has an essay that is sort of like that, addressing the reader. I honestly think if well done, is really effective. It can be really moving. And again, look at this art. I'm learning so much. It's so interesting. I love it. And at the center of it is political conflicts in the Middle East. So it's just very interesting. The Mind is Flat by Nick Chatter. Is it Chater? Because it's just one T. I started this and it is really interesting. His argument is that everything that we consider logical reasoning is actually fiction that we spin ourselves. And some of his arguments are really compelling, at least so far. But there's too much chatter, like TED Talk style feeling. And there's this whole paragraph. It goes on for a couple of pages where he's like, some people say that I really enjoy that the mind is flat, but actually I find this really depressing because blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, okay, I don't care. This is something that I find a lot with sort of behavioral psychology books, especially American ones. They're just so full of examples and I just don't need them. I mean, obviously you do need examples, but a lot of like little anecdotes. I think business books do this also. Oh, this situation with this office, and all of them are made up. Just a bit pointless, but don't let that put you off, well, I won't let that put me off. I will finish this because I do think the research is interesting and it is clearly presented. I'm also really enjoying Teenage by Jon Savage, and the subtitle for this is The Creation of Youth, 1875 to 1948. And this is all about the emergence of the adolescent as a cultural demographic and a consumer demographic. Yeah, really interesting so far. One that I started this weekend, and I'm actually kind of gutted that I didn't start before, and that I couldn't count it towards the challenge because I'm adoring it, is The Story of the Brain in 10.5 Cells by Richard Wingate. I love this. It's exactly what it says on the tin. Each chapter follows a different type of cell, but it has such a great historical approach. So it tells you how the cells were discovered, what methods, who are the key players. So it goes into, I wouldn't say too much detail, but a lot of detail, or more than I expected at least, about the conditions of the discovery of the cell and the research itself and the process of research. And that makes it sound like it's really long-winded and boring, but no, it's actually quite succinct, which is something that makes me even more excited because it's all in the writing. Okay, so now moving on to the challenges. There were 4 one-word challenges and I completed them all with some book twisting. But I do think that's encouraged. It's seen as, oh, look how creative you can be with the one-word prompts. First one was code. The original one was this one, which I really regret not having read that month, but I will read it next month. It's fine. Well, I guess this month. December. You know what I mean. I replaced it with another banger. I would be surprised if this doesn't make my top books of the year. And that is 38 Londres Street, On Impunity, Pinochet in England and a Nazi in Patagonia by Philippe Sands. I should have said this is not out yet. It will be out in April 2025, so make sure to check it out. I had never read Philippe Sands before this. And what this book is Philippe Sands was actually involved in the extradition case of Pinochet. So in case you don't know, Pinochet ran away after he was voted out, because that's surprisingly how the dictatorship ended in Chile, with a referendum. And so he was voted out and he moved to London after also having stolen millions and millions. Margaret Thatcher was a big supporter and they were like buddies because he was involved in an operation called Operation Condor, amongst many other things, where Spanish people and Argentinian people got murdered, and that was being investigated in Spain. They had jurisdiction, although all of that was very contested. So basically in 1998 he was arrested and there was this huge controversy about where he should be tried, whether he had immunity or not, and this was a sort of agenda setting trial, and Philippe Sands was involved in that. He was called to defend him, and then his Spanish wife, who also has a personal family connection to the Chilean dictatorship, because I think one of her, it wasn't a cousin, I don't think, but a member of his family was murdered by the dictatorship. She said, if you do this, I'll divorce you. And he didn't do it, thankfully. Anyways, he goes into that whole story and also talks about this Nazi guy who went to live in the south of Chile, who had connections to the dictatorship. It is an enraging book to read, but it's also so interesting. I don't want this to sound like he cheapens it, because he definitely doesn't. He pays all the respect that he should, but it does read like a thriller in many ways. It's structured in 3 parts, so like the Pinochet strand, the Walter Rauf, the Nazi strand, and his own sort of investigative strand. It goes into international politics, it goes into historical context, it has tons of literary references, which was also really nice to read, because Chile's literary history is so entangled to the dictatorship. Even now, there is this whole literary generation called literature of the children, which basically means children of the dictatorship. It's all very fascinating stuff. Keep an eye out for it. It'll be out in April and it's so damn good. Okay, for Path, I don't have this book on me right now because I actually worked an event and I left it there, but I will recoup it. But since Hidden Nature was a bit of a flop for me, I decided to pick another book for Path, and I read Out of Sheer Rage by Jeff Dyer, who I called Geo for a long time before I just realized it was a different spelling of Jeff. Not as embarrassing as saying the Ballad of Reading Gale, only to realize it's Reading Jail. So this is one of the funniest books I've ever read. Possibly also top book of the year material. I just adored it. It's a book that starts because, it's a book about Jeff Dyer being neurotic, indecisive, and failing to write a book about D.H. Lawrence. He always wanted to write an academic, serious study of D.H. Lawrence, and he keeps procrastinating it and finding ways to delay it, which we've all done. And so in the end, the book does become about Lawrence, which is interesting because I don't love Lawrence at all. I actually I'm not really interested in his writing very much. But he makes the idea of kinship with an author across time so interesting. And also, obviously, it's a book about writing. It's a book about how we approach literary criticism. It's brilliant. It's hilarious. I've read it out loud to some people, some paragraphs, and people have laughed. It's just so good. I can't recommend it enough. I just keep thinking about this book so much. Oh, and the idea that path is because he follows Lawrence's path on several occasions. So he travels to Italy to see where he lived. He was living in Paris for a bit because he lived there. He moves back to Oxford at some point, again, because he lived there. So yeah, there's a lot of following Lawrence's path, but you can also make the case, I guess, for, the path of writing and lots of stuff there. So really good. Oh, I didn't also say how I linked this up to code. Well, there's a lot of translation stuff going in here, but also there's lots of stuff about law. Sorry, if you are listening to this instead of looking at me, you don't understand that I held up 38 Londres Street again. But yeah, a lot about what word to use for the crimes. What crimes do you have jurisdiction for against, all of that. Okay, next one. Let's just move on, please. That's short, and I am reading The Mind is Flat, but as I said, I haven't finished it. So in the end, I went a very different way, and that is Adrian Tomine's The Loneliness of Long Distance Cartoonist, which is famously sort of stylized like a Moleskine. And what this is a collection of Adrian Tomine's most embarrassing moments as a cartoonist, and it's hilarious. I've read his Q&A and I've read a lot of his fiction as well, and I guess that's why I chose it for shot, because the reason I had chosen The Mind is Flat is because I gave it a shot because it was in a bookshop that I really like. Actually, I initially gave a shot to Adrian Tomine because he was recommended by someone at Mr. B's Emporium in Bath, and it was just so good that I've kept telling other people to give him a shot. And then I picked it up at this time because I think it was mentioned on Books Unbound podcast. This is the most tenuous connection. I don't recommend you start with him here because you might be put off. It's a very specific self-deprecating style and it can be a bit tiresome, but I really enjoyed it. I think he is a very neurotic, self-serious man, but then the vulnerability to put himself out there like this, I think is actually really admirable. So finally, for join, I just went with the standard collection of essays, which are all joined. And I read Consider the Lobster and Other Essays by David Foster Wallace. I keep saying this, but I hate how much I love his essays. He was a dick, but also he's such an amazing writer. I think if you find it too daunting, go for the essays. The essays are brilliant. These essays range from him reviewing, there's this really fun one. It's called Authority and American Usage. He reviews this book, Brian A. Gardner, and it's called A Dictionary of Modern American Usage. And it's a review, but it's also a dive into prescriptivism and linguistics, and it's just so brilliant. Obviously, there is Consider the Lobster, which is all about eating animals and a lot of different logical tangents about that. The last one is really interesting and actually still so relevant because it's about conservative radio. How Tracy Austin Broke My Heart is about Tracy Austin's autobiography, but also sports memoirs in general. And it's just so good. I will say some of the essays, so the McCain essay and the first essay, which is about the adult video convention, are a bit overlong, which, you know, David Foster Wallace has famously a very tense relationship or contentious relationship with editors. I understand where he was coming from, but also some of the essays did need it. The essays that are much more condensed sometimes are the best ones. He is just so funny and insightful. I love his sort of self-editorializing as he goes, or like self-analyzing what he's already written, and that could not work for other writers, and often it doesn't, but with him it's just... So yeah, I completed all the challenges, baby. Let's talk about 3 more books that are not part of the challenges, but I read. Actually, let's just throw a quick one in that I technically read at the end of October, but I had put it on the pile and it's just so good. I really recommend it. It's called The Cure for Good Intentions by Sophie Harrison. It says it's the story of Sophie Harrison, who was an editor at Granta and went on to become a doctor at the NHS, but it's not about her going to med school. There's a little bit of that, but it's mostly about, I would say, moving from, you know, training at a hospital to then working as a GP. And this was before COVID. I think there's a little bit of COVID times, but there's a lot about, you know, the different conditions and what it means to be a doctor that is inserted in the community. She does home visits, or used to anyway. The constraints of being a GP in the NHS, having all these like really quick calls where you don't see people, you don't have all the resources that you might have in hospital. And it's just really, really interesting. She's a great writer. Highly recommend if you're interested. For example, if you like Henry Marsh, that survived. I also finally got to the interviews of James Baldwin, so that is the last interview and other conversations. These are great. Obviously, yeah, if you like someone, I would just recommend you get the last interview, obviously, if there is one. It's just, they are always so enriching and insightful. Really good rendering of the interviews on the page. In this case, also, the last interview was conducted while Baldwin was really sick, and they sort of knew that it might be his last interview, so there was a real sense of purpose there. I just love James Baldwin, and I am really glad that they picked interviews that delve into different aspects of his writing and his identities. I think my favorite one might have been when he is interviewed by a gay white guy, and you see sort of the disconnect between Baldwin and the queer community because of his race. I highly recommend. Okay, we're almost there. I also finally read Between the World and Me by Ta-Nehisi Coates. Very Baldwin in its approach. This is a letter to his son, or maybe can it be considered 2 letters to his son? I think so. Well, it's in 2 parts. Anyways, but it's addressed to his son, and it's beautiful, and it's all obviously about racism and privilege in America specifically. But what I think is so interesting is that he talks about the body and experiencing everything through the body. It's just so eloquently put and so moving. Often when we talk about racism and all these structural problems and bigotry, it's so easy to go abstract because there are a lot of abstract ideals at play, but obviously all these abstract ideals have very real consequences. I'm not doing it justice, but it's so good. Read it. It's so short. Just sit down, afternoon, devour it, but thoughtfully so. I also listened to 2 audiobooks that I want to tell you about, and the first one is by Cy Montgomery. It's the chicken book. It's called What the Chicken Knows, a new appreciation of the world's most familiar bird. I'm so glad I read this. It's only 2 hours, 9 minutes long, but it's so delightful. She reads it herself and she's a great reader. Yeah, it's a blend of memoir with, you know, science writing about chickens. Chickens are actually really interesting, and I never thought I would want to read a book about chickens. Well, that's not true. Like, given the choice, as I was, because I got an ALC of this, I'll gladly take it. Yeah, it's just that I don't think I've ever thought, I really want to know about chickens. But yeah, chickens are great. Simon Montgomery is a great author. I actually really liked this much more than The Soul of an Octopus. Maybe because I know less about chickens and this was really condensed, so it felt like it really went in and addressed the things. Whereas A Soul of an Octopus, I did like it, but I thought I could have used a little bit more science, a la Other Minds, which I love that book. I need to reread it. Anyways, yeah. What the Chicken Knows, great book. Oh, I shouldn't have saved this one for last because it's the one I'm most lukewarm about, but I knew I would be. Finally, basically, I listened to Beyond the Want, The Magic and Mayhem and Growing Up a Wizard by Tom Felton. And obviously there is the whole, Tom Felton is one of the few who hasn't really shunned J.K. Rowling, you know, especially Daniel Radcliffe and Emma Watson have been so vocal about their support for trans rights. I listened to it because I just wanted something I could play on the background and it would be easy listening. You know, I have this relationship with Harry Potter where I used to like it a lot, and now whenever I feel nostalgic for it, what I do, because it did provide that escape as it did for so many people. So whenever I feel nostalgic for it, I listen to a video essay about why it's terrible. So I just kind of wanted that same thing. Obviously there are loads of moments about filming with Alan Rickman, and you know, it's just like a bit of light fluff. Obviously he reads it himself, which is nice. He does talk about his substance abuse. It's fine. It's like an interesting enough story. It has some goss. Actually, what I found most insightful and most interesting was like such a candid and reflective way of getting into drugs and stuff. He was like, yeah, it's just fun, you know, people offer you shit and then suddenly you're out of control. And that was refreshing because usually it'll be like the weight of fame and whatever. And he's a very simple-minded guy, but like in a nice way. I've gone on about this book enough. It's fine if you are interested in Tom Felton or Harry Potter or whatever. Give this a listen. See why I didn't want to end on this note. Just one last reflection, I guess, on Nonfiction November. I really enjoyed having a month for nonfiction. This year has been all about fiction, and right now I'm sort of inhaling fiction, but it just made me realize that I like nonfiction so much. And obviously I read it throughout the year, but I just enjoy Nonfiction November, and I enjoy dedicating 1 month exclusively to nonfiction. And I think I will keep it up next year, even though obviously the event won't be the same and it won't be as official. I'm looking forward to doing Nonfiction November next year, so I'll definitely do it in this way where it's like just nonfiction. That's all. Let me know if you've read any of these books, if you want to read any of these books after hearing me talk about them. What did you read? Did you do the challenges? What was your experience? Did you see any interesting content? Because I haven't been massively online. I say that, but I haven't been checking out a lot of booktube. So if you've seen something really cool that I think I should check out, please give me a heads up and I'll go. Okay, that's it. See you next time. He's guarding. Oh, that's awful. No, I'm not gonna say that. I'm also really enjoying Savage by Jon. Let's continue before I say more nonsense. I don't know what I'm doing.